Good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us at the Free Library of Philadelphia on Crowdcast. My name is Andy Cahan, Director of Author Events. We've been podcasting and presenting videos for more than a decade, but not like this. So before we begin, I wanted to point out a couple of useful features on your screen. You'll notice there's a button below suggesting that you buy a copy of our guest's new book. The button links to IndieBound, which will give you access to the online stores of independent bookstores nationwide. They need your support now more than ever. Excuse me. You'll also see the Ask a Question link, which you can use for the aforesaid purpose, or to suggest a topic. You can also upvote questions by using the up and down arrows in the left margin. Lastly, note that you can see the author on screen, but the author can't see you. We'll have to save the pleasure of your company for our next event at the library, which couldn't be soon enough. It's now my honor to introduce our guest. An award-winning poet, essayist, and fiction writer, Julia Alvarez is renowned for her poignant and politically insightful books, including How the García Girls Lost Their Accents and her international bestseller, In the Time of the Butterflies. She joins us tonight to discuss Afterlife, her first novel for adults in more than a decade. I can assure you that it has been well worth the wait. As a recent reviewer in the New York Times reminded, like much of Alvarez's writing, Afterlife is anchored not just in easy humor and sharp observation, but in her fine-tuned sense for the intimacies of immigrant sisterhood. Julia, welcome back.
Hi, Andy. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you on the official birthday of Afterlife. Today's the pub date. I mentioned to you before in the green room that it's a little strange to be delivering my new baby in quarantine. But given what's happening, it seems like a very small disappointment. And also, we've always known that reading is about being together apart. So, in a sense, this kind of makes sense. I was also remembering that it was almost a year ago that I was at the Philadelphia Free Library in the flesh. It was on Shakespeare's birthday, April 23rd, and I was on stage to celebrate the 25th anniversary of In the Time of the Butterflies with Concepcion de Leon. And it was a wonderful evening. It was a wonderful audience, warm-hearted, and so I'm remembering that as I come to you virtually. And so thanks to readers that are there from from Philadelphia that might have been there before. And for readers, the great thing about being virtual is that you can be anywhere you want, and you can be wearing whatever you want because we don't see you. We had to get dressed up in a little bit. So anyhow, I thought that what I would start with is reading the very, very beginning of the novel and talking a little bit about it after you get a sense of its opening and how it starts. The opening is very different, the prologue, from the rest of the book. It's called Broken English, and I think you'll see why it's got that title. And all you need to know is that we're in the point of view of Antonia. She is Latina woman who is just retiring from her long life as a teacher at a college, and she, is looking forward to and dreading a little bit retirement, time with her husband, and what comes that's supposed to be the golden years. So, Broken English. She is to meet him, a place they often choose for special occasions, to celebrate her retirement from the college, a favorite restaurant, and the new life awaiting her. A half-hour drive from their home, a mountain town, 20 if she speeds in the 30-mile zone. Tonight, it makes more sense. A midway point, to arrive separately, as she will be driving down from her doctor's appointment. She gets there first, as he will be driving from home. He should have been there before her. She starts calling his cell. After waiting 10, 20 minutes, he doesn't answer. Irritation turns to worry. No surprise there. Always leaves it behind in his work jeans pocket. The hospital, 911, the police. Have you seen him? Or turns off the sound at the movies and then forgets to turn it back on. Can you please help me find him? Even now, months later, about 6 feet, thinning hair, a boy's blue eyes, when she knows good and well, dusk deepening, how he had been driving up the mountain. He feels a stab of pain, already thinking of what he might order, coming from his left side but radiating out, wondering about her state of mind, the special, if it is special, if she would be excited or terrified, or his default favorite, salmon with lemon dill sauce, like a sword piercing his left side. Substituting mashed potatoes for the fries, they're very good about substitutions. Though how would he know what it feels like to have a sword piercing his left side? Because of his medical training, understanding what is happening, not wanting to cause more harm, pronounced dead on arrival. He forgets to charge it and it runs out of juice. Even now, 3 months shy of a year later, pulling his car off the road, rolling gently to a stop, when she knows exactly what happened. A ditch that might as well be his grave. Discovered by a passing cyclist, rushed to the ER. Why, he was late. A ruptured aortic aneurysm, as he is to be cremated and therefore have no grave per se. Neither he nor she could have foreseen, even now, a boy's blue eyes, and cannot comprehend how someone she loved, she keeps running and rerunning that night in her head. Can you please help me find him? Can be nothing but dust, unread emails, fragments, unpaid bills, memories, broken glass, dented bumper, a new life awaiting her. Both terrified and excited. How can it be? Can you please help me find him? Tall with thinning hair, a new life awaiting her. Can you help me find him? A mystery she cannot by any means solve. Nevertheless, she keeps asking, where are you? As this is the only way she knows. Can you help me find him? How to create an afterlife for him. So that's the prologue in full. And as you can tell from the fragments, it's like little shards of moments and memories and questions and things that were going through her head, all sort of blown apart. Because here is a woman that had her life already figured out, everything sort of in place. She was entering upon, as I said, the golden years, and felt that everything, she was within a safe and secure place in her life. And in a minute, in an evening, it all comes apart. And so we meet Antonia after that in her trying to sort of sort through all the things that have happened and figure out who she is in this new stage of life. So that in a sense, part of the reason that the title is Afterlife, it's not that her husband Sam is going to come back from the dead, but I think of it as afterlife as really an accurate description of all our lives, that we have a life that is filled with many little deaths along the way. And things we have it all together, we've had it all figured out, and then boom, something happens, and that's life. I mean, this is life. And you have to continually and hopefully come through it, no way to evade it, and hopefully come together and into a larger version of yourself. If you're, as I say, lucky, if you have open-heartedness, a community, she has her sisters, that you can survive these little deaths and come through. So it's very much about this woman. It's about her relationship with her sisters. It's about her relationship with herself, of course, and also it has another plot with the undocumented Mexican migrant workers in her community. That's another part of the plot that comes into her life. She's always depended on literature and the things she's taught and the wisdom of the ages and these great writers that she loves. And she is going to find out that sometimes words are not enough. Sometimes life demands of us more than just to be a bystander. So it sounds like a big novel, and it is, however, a short novel. It is. When I had it typed up, it was under 200 pages, but I think it goes over because it's a typical Algonquin book, a very beautiful little size. But the whole idea, in terms of formally, that I was challenged by, is that I've always admired these short lyrical novels, that follow a kind of Japanese sensibility, haiku sensibility, in which you strip everything unnecessary away so that what remains is charged. And I've always admired that, but I think part of it is my Latina sensibility, my Rococo sense of language and Spanish. I always had sagas with families and different points of views, and it went on and on because that seems sort of a natural and traditional influence in my storytelling. So I was challenged, and I didn't want to make it that if that's not what it was going to be, but this seemed to really be in sync formally with my idea of what's going on in Antonia's life. How do we live in a diminished world, things falling apart, and still come out the larger version of ourselves? So challenged by that quip by Pascal. Had I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. So if you wonder why it took me so long to write this novel, because I wanted nothing extra in it but what it needs. So I think that's enough of an introduction, Andy. I don't know if you want to turn it over to your questions and any audience questions.
Oh, I have a whole bunch of questions, actually. I'm going to start at a very traditional point, though. You talk about the pebble in your shoe. That's sort of the initiating idea for something. You've given us something of an overview, but was there one thing in particular, apart from wanting to strip down an idea of what we give up?
Well, there were so many, it's so hard because later you're sort of analyzing it and looking at it, and it's all these little things bubbling up, a whole root system that sort of is coming together. And it's a messy process. And then later when you reflect on it, it seems, oh, the pebble in my shoe was that, but it's a combination of things. I felt like all of us were living in what I call elegiac times, where we were seeing the end of so many things environmentally, with climate change, the extinction of species, the storms. It seemed so much loss on that level. There was also seen a loss in our civility and coming together as a community, draconian immigration laws, gun violence, divisiveness. It just felt like it was so much loss out there. And every day it sort of was, even before the moment we're living in, which is huge loss. Every day it was sort of like, how do we live in this kind of world and not lose hope in ourselves, in each other? How do we come together and work towards that beloved community? That seemed to be like the challenge ongoing of this time in our global life. And then personally, one of the great things about being from a huge Latina family is that you have this clan of people. You're never a nuclear, mother, father, and a few siblings. It's huge. Tios, tias, primos, primas, comadres. It's huge. But what it also means is that at a certain point, you start losing a whole phalanx of people, all these significant others, that whole generation, you're losing them. I lost my parents within 6 months of each other. I lost tios, tias. It just seemed like, you know, what, how do we move beyond loss and not get caught in it? And, I always say that for all my novels, I don't listen to music while I write. I would be too distracted, but there's always a soundtrack to my novel. And the one to this novel was the Leonard Cohen song, There Is a Crack in Everything. That's how the light gets in. So I wanted Afterlife to be the light coming through the crack, but not putting my head in the sand, not ignoring what's going on, but, facing the storm and saying, but there is a crack in everything. And that's how the light gets in. And that's where I'm going, So those were the many, many, many little pebbles. Losing my sister a few years ago was a huge thing, to suicide. And my heart goes out for anybody that has had a family member, a friend lost in that way. It's just also a kind of, it's dedicated to my sister. So it's very much thinking about those kinds of losses and how people lose hope when that happens in their lives. So as you hear, Andy, it's just a messy, huge root system.
Okay.
I don't know if digging into it helps, but sometimes for readers and writers who are out there who feel like, boy, she got this idea and she just wrote this tiny little novel. No way, Jose. It's writing, rewriting. It's something works, something doesn't work. And in the end, even if something was a detail that happened to the author, if it doesn't belong in the novel, if it doesn't work there, it has to go out. So figuring all of that out takes time, but the reward is in the ongoingness of the work, the ritual of it, the calling of it, the habit of art. I don't know, I think it was Flannery O'Connor that called it that. She said she wasn't always inspired. The muse didn't always come, but she was there from 9 to 12. And if the muse deigned to come, she would be there. She wasn't going to miss her. So I think the habit, the practice of art is how you get there through this messy process.
The book is strewn with so many quotes from great poets and essayists and writers and belles lettrists. And I wonder if you use those as a way to sort of keep you going also as you're working through the novel.
Well, they certainly are luminous little pieces of information. And for me, the thing about, a wonderful work of art, lines that stay with me is that I think of them as kind of string in the labyrinth. They're kind of help me move forward in mysterious ways by the combination of words, by the rhythm of how they're put together, and the little insights that they, detonate in my head. And so, yes, I use them. And of course, so does my character, because she's, she certainly has inherited my DNA in terms of my loves in literature. But part of the thing that Antonia comes to, and that I think, I can say that we come to at certain times in our lives, even with the thing we are most passionate about, and that we put and invested most of our, life and most of our loves in, is that sometimes it will fail us. That the words and the beauty is not enough. This life demands sometimes more of us than just these kinds of beautiful works of art. At the end of that Rilke poem, Archaic Torso of Apollo, it's a wonderful poem. Look it up. And he's in front of a beautiful statue of Apollo, and he's describing it to us. And you just can see it all, and it's so beautiful, and the marble and the limbs. And then the last line is something like, "Reader, you must change your life." In other words, this is this beauty that has been cast in stone. Now take it to heart. And how do you embody that in the kind of life that you live? So that it's not just something, an artifice. It's really the word made flesh. It's really embodied. This is something that Antonia learns, that it's not enough, her beautiful words, her faith in them, that, sometimes life, she has to connect with it, flesh on flesh, and roll up her sleeves and be a part of it.
Yeah, that seems to be her struggle, her main struggle throughout the novel, is both coming to terms with the death of Sam and then engaging with the world and finding the strength somehow to do that, and seeing what he means, what his life means within that context.
Right.
And she is constantly looking to those beautiful literary filaments that you talked about a moment ago, but also to who he was as a person to keep her going, but struggling with both those things, the ideal and also Sam's, the good he did in the community, and how that is constantly prickling her throughout to act against her tendency toward literary inertia in a way.
Well, and also she's a reluctant activist. And part of the thing that that she deals with as a character is that she's the Latina. So everyone assumes she got Sam, the sort of Anglo white male, involved in her politics, but he's actually the one that's the activist.
Right.
And she's the reluctant one. But part of the thing also that the title deals with is, she wants to create an afterlife for him. And one of the insights that comes to Antonia, came to me also in writing this novel, is that when people die, we lose them. But if we lose the qualities that we loved in them, that we cherished in them, that we thought really were the light coming through, if we let those die, we really lose all of them. So it sort of behooves us to, as survivors, to not let those qualities die. I'll give you a personal example. My mother-in-law was just the most lovely woman. And just, she followed that Quaker precept of whenever she was with a tough person, a tough situation, somebody was mean-hearted or small-hearted, she'd say, well, instead of getting upset, she said, well, let's see what love can do. And I thought, wow. So sometimes when someone's driving me crazy and I just am hitting that short fuse, I hear her. And I say, okay, let's see what love can do. And she's back. She has an afterlife. Every time that I use the phrase, better angels of our nature, old Abe Lincoln comes back. Every time I say the beloved community, there's Martin Luther King. That with these people, we understand how these things that they represented, or these ideas, or these ways they channeled some beautiful part of being a humane human being. We can see it with them, but it's true of all the people in our lives, and when we lose them, we can give them an afterlife. and not have that vibrant life they were completely go. So that's something that Antonia struggles with her husband, with losing her husband, and also, other people in her life. I won't give away what happens by saying more.
Good.
About that.
Good. Well, we know that the husband is killed off early on.
Right.
So how did Bill feel about that?
Oh. Well, he's very funny. Bill is such a wonderful reader because he doesn't. I was going to say he doesn't take anything personally. There's a wonderful quality. He doesn't take himself personally. And so he read it, and I said, well, I do worry because some things reflect things in my life. If so and so, I dread hurting anybody because, I do come from a we culture. It's not just me. I'm a we. And he said, what has anybody got to complain about? I get killed on the first page. I said, but it's not you. It's a fictional character. But anyhow, it is funny. It's wonderful for a writer to have, your closest family member be like that, because it gives you a lot of license to, to explore fictionally without setting up all kinds of cautionary things on yourself, which is a way to really close down, as a writer. And I have mentioned before that, some of my writing has always been close in details many times to, my own life. But I heard Julia Glass, who, was talking about how she writes things that are, quote, totally fictional, made a comment that really stuck with me. She says, all fiction is emotionally autobiographical. Because even when you're writing about something that has nothing to do with you, the reason you're attracted to that subject or that character or that situation has everything to do with how there's something in it that has juice in it for you, some obsession, some relationship, something that you as a writer, as a human being, you're trying to figure out with the writing. Because writing is so much not about writing what you know, but writing to find things out. So I thought that was a really useful remark that she made about even when we're writing total fiction, whatever that means, that we're drawn to those subjects and characters, in part because of who we are, our lives, the people around us, and what we've been through.
That makes sense. It also makes me wonder, you've got Antonia, who has a lot of you, obviously, emotionally, biographically, in her. And she's at the locus of sort of two different and parallel narratives. One very personal with her sister and what happens with Izzy throughout the book. And then her engagement in the community with Mario and, let's just say, some other folks as well.
Yeah.
And obviously one of those things definitely happened to you, but the other, engaging with the community as in the immigrant community now, is that something you're involved with in Vermont, the way Antonia is in the narrative?
Well, let me first correct some of or adjust it a little bit, that what happens in the book isn't exactly what happened to Julia Alvarez. As a matter of fact, I'm not really interested finally in Julia Alvarez. I'm only interested in, she's my research being. She's my she's the depository of so many little things that as the writer I'm trying to work into a narrative. So if some things that happened to her work, if some things I've read, if some things I've seen, been told, whatever works is what gets into that character. And one of the things I did want with Antonia is I didn't want her I didn't want her to just be a suitcase I packed with myself or anything. I wanted I wanted her to be I wanted to learn things from her. I keep saying I wanted her to be smarter than me. I wanted to keep learning things because one thing I did want in her character is that I wanted her to be totally accurate about what's going on, not try to make her into one thing or another, not hold her hostage to my plot or my ideas, but to follow and to create that character. So in some ways she might reflect experiences that happened to me, and not all of these things with sisters and so forth happened to me. They're a creation of what and an invention of what was working in the plot. The same, I've had some involvement in Vermont we have a huge undocumented migrant community. It turns out now that the dairy industry in Vermont is really being held up by many milkers that have come from Mexico. And imagine here in Vermont, such a different and such a far piece to come. When it started to happen about 15, 20 years ago, it happened to me because my husband had some farmer come in with a Mexican migrant worker. The farmer couldn't understand him, and Bill, via me and osmosis, knew some Spanish. And so he came home and told me about it. And slowly I got involved in doing translating. And I wrote a book called Return to Sender for young readers, which involved a volunteer, volunteering I did at a local elementary school where there were young kids of the migrant workers, and learning a little bit about that situation and their lives. But I would be passing myself off as a great volunteer in the community to say that I've been super active in it, but I am somewhat active in it, and also very much in admiration of a group that has pulled together, and some of whom helped me with the research in this novel, so that I would learn things, and many migrant women that I met through that process that are in our community, and learning of their plight and situation. So yes, it is very much, there's no place that this isn't happening, and it's happening in little rural Vermont as well.
We were talking earlier about your idea about how the writer really needs to engage in community too, needs to be aware of what's going on in the world. But it seems like you also feel the need to include that in your fiction as well. I mean, this is a very contemporary narrative that you've written. It feels like it's almost right up to the moment, apart from the virus. With regard to,
in some ways, though, it is very much a novel about worlds falling apart, and how do we live those moments and still not close down, and have humor. Laughter is important in this novel. It might have sounded really grim, but I've often described it as the book of Job with a sense of humor. Instead of Job, we have a Latina woman, but things are happening, and yet I want resilience. I want humor, because I think humor is a sense of perspective, and it keeps us vibrant and joyful. I love that line from Wendell Berry, where from a poem of his, and I've been quoting it to myself these days, as the line is, "Be joyful, though you have considered all the facts." So, this is part of what I want in Antonia. So yeah, I mean, I feel like we talked a little bit about this before in the green room, that I very much am believer in something the poet Czesław Miłosz, I'm probably butchering his name, Nobel Prize winner in literature, Polish poet, lived many years in California, translated beautifully by Robert Haas, among others. And he says that he didn't necessarily, he was asked, are you a political poet? He says he didn't necessarily set out to write political poetry, but that he believed that writers, artists, you can't sink below a certain level of awareness about your times and what is happening around you. That if you sink below that, that somehow your work is not useful to us. That it has its head in the sand. You're ignoring something vital and important. If you were alive in 1939, in this world, in Germany, to have ignored that, to write beautiful aesthetic poetry and not be aware and not reflect that, even if you don't engage the topic directly, to be aware of the zeitgeist, because I think that's something that gets into writers' work, what they are living. Another reason to be engaged as a writer in the world around you. It's not just ethical and sort of our responsibility as the people that sort of have some sort of power to get the story out. It's part of how we serve our communities through our work, which in our case would be writing a novel or making a piece of music. But that's part of that's our activism. That it's not, well, are you an activist or are you an artist? Art is activism. To be an artist, to be accurate, to live with your eyes open, to be present, is a form of powerful activism in terms of the communities that we're in. You're not going to, and that's part of what happens to Antonia. She is awakened in a big way and has to engage with what is going on around her.
Well, she finds.
Yeah. No, Andy, please.
No, I was going to say she seems to find the strength to do that in various ways.
As we all do, as we all do. Somehow we cobble it together. If we're lucky, there's love, a loving community, other people whom you can help, and that fills you up. It happens. A poem that you read that has a beautiful line, be joyful, though you have considered all the facts. Mm-hmm. Yes, that'll fill my tank till noon today, etc. Yep.
Yeah, it ain't always easy. No. Let me take a look at the questions from the audience here and see what they have in mind. Someone asks, since you're also a poet and a wonderful one, I was wondering if you could say something about what calls you to poetry versus fiction at any point in your writing.
That's a very good question, because I'm often asked, and I ask myself, well, am I sort of a dilettante genre person? Because I just and I could frame it that way. I also have sometimes framed it that there are these borders that we've made. This is fiction over here, and this is nonfiction, and this is poetry. And as an immigrant, I'm always there's an impishness in me that wants to transgress where someone says there's a border. I want to cross over. I want to make a bridge. So sometimes I think, well, when I read that prologue, and when you see it on the page, you'll see it's got like, I don't know what the term is. I think they're virgules, they're slashes.
Slashes,
that you do line breaks. So in a way, you could think that this is, sort of a poem, stream of consciousness poem. So sometimes I think I'm writing my poetry and my prose, because I do listen for how the prose sounds, and I have to sound it out. So I think that the skills in one are moved into another one. But that said, I talked about the messy process of writing, that sometimes you start out and you think it's going to be a novel, but the material, the movement of it, the mystery of it moves you to another genre, and you try that out, and it's a perfect fit. When I started In the Time of the Butterflies, it began as poems in the voices of the four sisters, and I couldn't let them go. Even once it became a full-fledged novel, it was supposed to have those poems between the different sections. And then finally I realized, and my editor at the time helped me realize that, I needed that, but the novel didn't need that. So it's interesting. And I had a conversation last night in a Politics and Prose virtually with the wonderful writer Jakira Diaz. And somebody asked about writer's block. And she said one of the things she does is that if she's blocked in some nonfiction she's writing or fiction, she'll change the genre. And that sometimes can be a backdoor into the material. So that can also be a good way to sort of be playful with the work. And what you develop in one genre will, even if you're just writing poems in your diary or something, but really focused on prose, it will get in there.
Yeah.
It will get in your prose.
Well, the music is in there, and so is the humor. I didn't want to make it sound like it was an entirely dark novel, because it's the opposite of that. The interplay between the sisters is just wonderful. And that seems to be a theme of yours, writing about sisters, groups of sisters. And I wonder how you came to that. Was it familial? Was it through writing about the Mirabel sisters? Was it something else? It seems to be a dynamic that works.
Yeah, García girls as well. Well, I am from a family of sisters, but I think I've always I've always been interested in sisterhood, and I don't mean just blood sisterhood. I went to a school, an all girls boarding school, and we've just in the last, I'd say 7-8 years, we've rediscovered our group of women, and I tell you, these women are amazing. We've had our own little reunions. We come together. We spend a few days together, storytelling, catching each other up on our lives, and in between those meetings, if something happens in the lives of one or the other, positive, negative, suddenly the whole group is there. I got wonderful emails celebrating the birth of Afterlife today. Happy birthday, this new book. And so, I'm interested in how women support each other. And so often, I was raised on the canon. That's all there was. I was there before pre-multicultural times. And it was, most of the novels we read were mostly about white males and many times British males, and there always seemed to be, the journey of the hero, an individual on his own, picking himself up and fighting that quest, and it sure was exciting, but that wasn't my experience of life. My experience was more, you hook arms with the sisters, with your mujeres, with your comadres, with your hermanas, with your primas, and you work it out communally. So I was interested in narratives that reflected that, multi-voice narratives, points of view, history in terms of In the Time of the Butterflies as experienced by women, instead of how we usually have read the history. So I guess, yeah, sisterhood is a theme in my novels. And by the way, to put in a plug for a novel that just is getting born too, or will be soon, The Mountains Sing. I wish I could pronounce Kwe Mai, her novel.
Oh yeah, I think we're going to have her next week, actually.
Oh, read it, because we hear so much the story of Vietnam from soldiers, or um, most of the narratives I've read male point of view, and this is a grandmother and the grandmother telling the stories, the granddaughter, and what she lives through a saga of. It's not sisterhood in that way, but it's that female point of view, and that linking of, I think very much of a female form of novel, at least from a traditional art of quilting, that a story comes together by putting all the little pieces rather than just one cloth, and one cloak. It's that putting together of our scattered little narratives, and the mother of us all storytellers, Scheherazade, with her Arabian Nights. It was, the putting together of many little stories to keep herself alive.
You that Antonius is not necessarily a Scheherazade, but you sort of strip away a lot of elements, and you focused entirely on telling the story through one person this time, which is, I think, unusual for your books. They're usually polyvocal in nature.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned the sort of Japanese aesthetic and the stripping down and haiku. And one of the things I noticed was that this is a very roundabout way to getting to a question that's been lingering with me about a stylistic point, and that's you don't use quote marks for any of the characters, and I think that's very unusual. And I wonder why you did away with those. Did you find them a distraction for quoting speech, or is it because it is all filtered through Antonia's perspective?
Well, it's some ways, it's also another stylistic thing that was a decision, I guess. I didn't italicize when she uses Spanish. That I just I wanted some sense. And this is something I've learned from, because we're the viejitas now. We're the ones that the elders of are, at least I see myself that way, as someone that has been through now almost a life at this craft. But we learn things from young writers, and many young writers have done away with it. And I always have been intrigued by it, and how, whenever there's quote marks, first of all, you have to be, it's hard not to use them, because you have to still make it very clear what's dialogue, and so the reader doesn't get lost. You never want the reader to feel confused about where they are in terms of how you have structured it. They can be baffled, or something can make them think. But I wanted something. I wanted a way, which I thought was so beautifully done by many young writers, of not making the artifice of the fiction so in front of you. It's sort of like when they took drama out of the proscenium, the classic stage,
Yeah, the
and
proscenium.
get it around. Yeah, and I wanted that kind of directness. And as you said, I wanted to strip it down, even at the level of punctuation, without losing my reader, of some of the traditional ways in which we've framed the art and put it in the art box. I wanted to take that away, because that's also a kind of safety. And one of the things that Antonia is dealing with is the safeties are falling away, and at the level of the prose and the syntax, I wanted that to be happening as well. And while I'm at it, because I don't want to be remiss, I invoked Scheherazade, and one of the people that I met last year during the 25th anniversary of Butterfly's mini tour was a wonderful woman in DC, Lisa Labo. And I talked then about this project that I would want to do called the Shahrazad Project. And it was a way of art and activism coming together. And it was the idea that it was already less than 101 nights before the election, now in 2020. But for maybe 101 nights, a woman artist would go in front of the White House and tell a story, or play some music, or dance. She would be the Scheherazade for the night. And it was a way to use storytelling and playfulness and the arts as a kind of activism. And so, I'm full of ideas.
Did you say that it
But
happened?
Lisa said, oh, let's do it. And there is a website called the Shahrazad Project, and it will go live with people posting online their stories, because we were going to do it in the flesh. And this pandemic, among other things, has shown us that online storytelling and engagement is a very powerful tool. So the idea is to do this and to keep ourselves alive and make sure everybody gets out to vote or votes online. I don't know how that's going to work out come November. And, we need to come together. So enough said about that, a little sideline.
Well, it's clear that art is critical during this time of political upheaval and social distancing and bunker. I want to ask just a few more questions before we wrap up. These are from the audience, and one of them is, sorry about that. Hi, I'm a Dominican first-generation American boy of 11 years.
Oh my God.
And he asked, what has been your favorite book to write, and what book would you like me to read? Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. That's, first of all, bienvenido. Hello. It's great to have a Quisqueyano out there. I can't see you, but I came to this country when I was 10 years of age, as I used to say it. So very close to your age. And picking a favorite book, that's like, if you have any siblings and you ever have asked your mommy or papi, who's the favorite? What do they tell you? You're all my favorite. So I would find it hard to pick a book. I think it's true to say that my favorite book is the one that I'm working on right now, because that's the one that needs my love to get born. So in a way, it's a very fickle thing. We write a book, it's our favorite, and we're totally invested in it. We put everything in it, and then it's done, and we have to fall in love with a new book. But what book would I send you to read? Well, they're the Tia Lola books, but you might be beyond them, but they're about a Dominican tia who comes to the United States. She doesn't know any English, and she moves in with her niece, and the niece has a little can't remember his age now, but I think 10-year-old boy and a little sister, and it's about their relationship. He's very American and she's very Dominican, and it's very funny. And Tia Lola's kind of like a Dominicana Mary Poppins, if you can imagine that. And the other book, if you want to know a little bit more about our history before we were free, it's the story of a little girl in the dictatorship of Trujillo, and her family and what they go through, and it's based on the story of family and friends' families that stayed behind, because my family got to escape the dictatorship when I was 10. But this is the life of a family, a little girl and her family that stay behind and what happens to them. So that's, it's called Before We Were Free. Either one of those. But I just am tickled that you would want to read one of my books, and that I'll meet you between the covers of my books. I feel very thrilled to welcome a new reader to my books that come very much from our Dominican roots.
Wonderful. One last question that some people seem to be interested in, and I'm having a little trouble with the phrasing here. As you write, do you find that it's a sounding board to what you want the audience to gain an understanding of your point of view? So it seems to be asking, does your writing become a sounding board for what ultimately you want to convey to the reader, if I'm understanding the question?
I think that's how I would also understand it, Andy, because I mean, it's an interesting question. But I would have to say, I mentioned this briefly at the very beginning, that when when I write, I think when a lot of writers write, I can't make a blanket statement for everybody, but that I anyhow write not because I know something that I want to megaphone it out to my reader. I write because I want to find things out. So as I write, I'm discovering things. So I don't know what I want to say ahead of time, or I'm letting the story. I'm sort of channeling the story, letting myself follow its lead, or the lead of my characters, and that kind sense of discovery, I think infuses the writing with a kind of energy and tension that wouldn't be there if I was just using, as I said, as a suitcase, packing in all my verities or the things I found out. So I think I'm learning. I'm learning as I go along. That said, one of the great things, that happens in the revision process, and so much of writing is revision, and with your editor, and a shout out to my editor, Amy Gash, is that many times an editor helps you to look at your work uh, as if somebody else had written it. And that's when you can hear things that you can't hear when you're so invested in the writing, that you don't realize that something isn't quite working, something is confusing, something isn't quite right. So I think that's also a sounding board for a writer, a good editor, a good reader, and your own revision process, which means, again, putting it sometimes away for a little while, coming back to it, and reading what you've written as if someone else had written it, so that you can see where what you meant to put in there, that could be said to be a sounding board, if what you intended is really what's coming across.
Right. Well, Julia Alvarez, thank you so much for sharing your publication date with us. The book is wonderful. It's warm. It's smart. It's what everybody expects from you. It's great reading. Wow. Yeah, we have expectations. We love your writing.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Andy, for having me again in less than a year. And this time not for Shakespeare's birthday, but Afterlife's birthday. And I've been telling people who have congratulated me today that to remember to sing happy birthday twice while washing your hands, so that we all stay safe. So if it helps you to do that too, that's great.
See,
So
it's practical as well as artistic and entertaining. Well, thank you to everyone. Thank you to Julia. I just want to remind everyone that you can follow us on Crowdcast. Visit us online at freelibrary.org/author events to access our digital archive and event schedule. Thank you again for joining us. Keep reading and have a good night. Take care, Julia. Until we see you in real life.
Safe, stay healthy and whole, body and soul.
Okay.
Good night. Good night.